Hello, this is Rabbi Levin. The world is very fearful and very concerned about the outbreak of swine flu. The question that people should be asking themselves is, why is there a sudden outbreak of swine flu? And many people are asking, why did it seem to start in Mexico, and particularly in Mexico City? Why is this very unusual thing happening that a whole city has to be closed down, and that billions of dollars are being prepared to be spent on defeating or stopping swine flu? I would like to deal with this from a Jewish perspective, and I apologize in advance if this is going to offend people, but we have an ancient tradition, thousands of years old, that when something happens that is tragic, we are supposed to be introspective and ask ourselves, what and why is God doing this to people? So I'd like to share with you a few ideas that will perhaps help understand this. One of them is an ancient Talmudic dictum that once God decides to send a response to immorality and a punishment, if you will, a good old-fashioned word called punishment for misdeeds, he doesn't necessarily distinguish between the righteous in the population and those who are the evildoers. And consequently, an entire location can suffer because of the misdeeds or the gravity of misdeeds. It's very interesting that in the last few months, Mexico City in particular reversed a long-standing anti-abortion policy, and the mayor and legislators who did this boasted about this, how this would set an example for the entire world of so-called progressiveness. In other words, the extent to which they could revolt against their own Catholic backgrounds and exalt baby killing. Another Jewish concept is that God deals measure for measure. When people say to themselves, we are going to get into wholesale slaughter of innocent babies and show a total disregard for life, within weeks afterwards, a plague breaks out, which really shows a tremendous lack of concern and consideration for life. I think it's important to realize that there is a cause and effect. People get offended, but I said this nearly a quarter of a century ago when I was interviewed on New York TV. AIDS isn't God giving a kiss to people who practice sodomy. AIDS is obviously a signal from God that sodomy is very, very much disapproved. STD, sexually transmitted diseases, some of them which have no known cures, like certain types of herpes, this is not God kissing and approving of heterosexuals who engage in promiscuity. This is God, through nature, sending a very clear message that this kind of misbehavior is going to have repercussions, negative repercussions. Let me go a step further. When ancient Jewish cemetery in Prague was under assault by progressive people in Prague, Czechoslovakia, that didn't have any consideration or respect for the dead, it's interesting, I heard that there were significant floods in Prague at the time or shortly after they showed this lack of respect for the deceased. And now there's another place, perhaps it's in Lithuania, in the city of Vilnius, where they were again showing disrespect, and they wanted to build all kinds of developments over and on top of the dead people. So what happens? God sends an economic crisis where developers don't have the money. They lose tremendous amounts of money. There is a spiritual cause and effect. And that's what we're seeing here with swine flu. So let's wake up and understand that God does reign over us. There is a higher power. There is a cause and effect. In New York City, which has the largest concentration of swine flu victims right now, as we are making this a tape, right now they are trying to promote homosexual marriage, which our sources teach us. Thousands of years ago, our sources teach us that homosexual marriage is the last step in the decline of society before the floods of Noah that we read about in Genesis. So, yes, this is a warning. This is a tough love warning. There's a very, very serious cause and effect between misbehavior, licentiousness, not showing a respect for life, and not showing a respect for God's moral laws, and the tragedies and the plagues that often occur. So, whether we like it or not, let's get back to standards of decency and morality. And God willing, we will be able to weather the floods, the storms, the devastations, the economic hardships, the swine flu, the AIDS, and many other things as we return to the good graces of a good God. Let me be perfectly clear. I'm not saying that we know exactly why things happen and what God's reasons are for doing specific things. What I am saying is that we have a specific tradition that tells us, as Maimonides speaks about it, the Talmud speaks about it, that when something bad happens to a person, certainly when it happens to society, we have to be introspective. We have to figure out what laws are we transgressing, what part of the moral code that God gave to Jews and non-Jews alike are we transgressing that can cause the particular catastrophe? And therefore, I'm saying, think about what's happening. Chances are that we should err on the side of caution and stop the kinds of misbehaviors, whether that's the total reason that God is doing these things or a partial reason. We've got to repent and come back to basic standards and morality and decency.